We're talking all about direct indexing. And no, that is not the same as buying an index fund. Is this just another product that the industry is trying to sell you, or is it legit? You don't want to miss today's episode. Hey everyone, this is John Boyd, host of the Emerging Wealth Podcast. Thanks for joining us and making us a part of your week. Before we dive in, if you're finding value in our content, please give us a like. This helps us reach more listeners and share quality financial education. Next, I'd recommend visiting our website at www.modernwealth.com. Head on over to our Learning Center. It's packed with videos and articles designed to help you optimize your wealth. While you're there, consider subscribing to our newsletter. Thanks again for being with us. Now let's dive into this week's episode. How's it going, guys? My name is John Boyd. I'm the founder and lead wealth advisor at Modern Wealth, and welcome to another episode of the Emerging Wealth Podcast. I appreciate you guys being here today because we got a good one for you. We're going to talk about direct indexing. Is this just a money grab? Is this legit? Is this actually a good investment strategy? We're starting to see more commercials about this. We're starting to see a lot of brokerage firms push this on clients. So let's talk about it. So in today's episode, you're going to learn about what direct indexing is and why someone might want to use it. And I'm also going to keep it very real because I'm going to talk about my personal beef with these type of strategies. So before we dive in, all of this is meant to be educational only and not specific advice. If you need specific advice, please contact a licensed fiduciary financial planner like Modern Wealth for a specific recommendation. So, direct indexing, what is it? Let's break this down as simply as possible. So, direct indexing is an account, and these accounts are effectively sold by various asset managers and brokerage firms. So, think big names that are out there where you have maybe a 401k at, a Roth, a brokerage account, etc. And what these accounts go ahead and do is they mirror, let's say, the S&P 500, and they do this by buying all or a significant portion of all the individual stocks within the index. So quite literally, you're going to have a separate account. This account is going to buy hundreds of stocks that mirror the index, and that is going to be the direct indexing strategy. This is very different than buying, let's say, an index fund, because when you do this, you literally have only one position maybe in the account. Whereas with a direct index, you're going to have hundreds of positions within the account. Now, you might be wondering, why the heck would somebody want to buy hundreds of individual stock positions when you can quite literally just buy one ETF or mutual fund that replicates the index and likely does it much cheaper? Well, it all boils down to tax loss harvesting. If you aren't familiar with tax loss harvesting is when you sell an asset that is at a loss and absorb that loss for tax purposes. But you aren't just going to eat a loss for the sake of eating a loss. You're going to replace this position with a similar holding that has similar performance. And the reason for this is so that you can absorb that loss for tax purposes and ensure that you don't miss a potential run up on that stock. So let's say that you had, let's say, Coca-Cola at a loss in your portfolio and you wanted to hold on to that for the long term, but you want to at least take advantage of that loss for tax purposes. Maybe you go ahead, sell Coca-Cola and replace it with, let's say, Pepsi. Their performance is maybe comparable, but they're two different securities, so you can absorb that loss and make sure that you're good standing for that wash sale period. After the 30-day wash sale period has passed, you go ahead and dump Pepsi and rebuy Coca-Cola. Now, what I just described is tax loss harvesting on just one position. But within a direct indexing strategy, that's what you're going to go ahead and do, but across the entire index, across hundreds of individual stocks. And the whole idea behind this is that in theory, within an index, maybe the index itself is maybe up 10% for the year, but not all the stocks within the index are up, right? There might be stocks that are in that index that are at a loss. And so the idea is that because you own all these individual stocks, you can identify the ones with losses, sell those, have in theory lots of losses for tax loss purposes, and yet still have an index that is performing positively over the long run. The firms that sell direct indexing strategies will highlight this, and they will typically point out that you have the potential to boost your after-tax returns net of fees anywhere between 2 to 3% by doing this. So that in and of itself is the main reason for direct indexing, right? It is a tax play to increase your after-tax returns. But there are some other benefits to direct indexing. The other big benefit to direct indexing is that you get to customize the underlying index. So let's say that you wanted to exclude a particular stock or an industry. When you own an index fund, you can't just go inside the index and exclude a particular sector. So for example, let's say you don't want to own tobacco stocks. Well, you can't do that, right? You're stuck with the tobacco stocks that are within the S&P 500. However, with a direct indexing strategy, you can sub those out of the index if you don't like them. Finally, the next big benefit, and this is mainly for people with concentrated stocks within their portfolio, is that with a direct index, you have the potential to perhaps blend in that concentrated position into the index. So for example, let's say you have a retired executive and they have millions of dollars worth of a company stock. What can be done is that stock is placed within a direct index account, and then slowly over time, you can blend that stock into the index and manage the capital gains as you diversify and in theory harvest losses from the other individual stocks within that index. So we've gone over a lot so far, so let's just recap. Direct indexing is just a way for you to own an index like the S&P 500, but it's a way for you to, in theory, do it in a much more tax efficient manner that is going to potentially increase your post-tax returns. Now, I will admit it, right? On the surface, all this sounds pretty darn cool, but in my opinion, it's kind of misleading and it is messy. And I've seen it firsthand because direct indexing has actually been around for a decade plus now, but it's just really started to hit the mainstream over the last year or so. So if you're thinking, all right, JB, go ahead and tell me what's your beef against direct indexing? Well, let me break it down for you. So first and foremost, these strategies aren't free. They can cost anywhere from 0.25% all the way to 1.25%. So there's a cost associated with these. The next big reason why I am, for the most part, pretty anti-direct indexing is that the tax benefits are oftentimes egregiously overstated. And I mean egregiously overstated. I'm so passionate about this that, in my opinion, I think that at some point, regulators are probably going to step in and make sure that there are more disclosures around this. So here's what I mean. So when you go to these different direct indexing providers that sell these direct index accounts, they will provide you with performance numbers. And at some of these direct index providers, they will include the potential after-tax returns in the performance numbers. The problem with this is that they assume most of the time an effective tax rate of 37%. So in 2023, to have an effective tax rate, keep in mind, that's not the same as a marginal tax rate of 37%. Your actual effective tax rate is 37%. You would likely need to be making well over $700,000 in W-2 income as a married couple, right? So that's a ton of money, and only a small portion of the population are those numbers maybe going to be relevant for. The other issue is that depending on when you set up the portfolio, you might not have losses. So for example, if you set up a direct indexing account, let's say April of 2020, right as the stock market starts to go straight up post-COVID sell-off, you are going to be hard pressed to find very many losses in that account to harvest from. And so the end result is you are just stuck with basically a more expensive index fund. So overstated tax benefits many times. Timing of when you set it up is very critical. But in addition to all of this, the indices these firms create where these direct indexes are supposed to be tracking are oftentimes not the same as, let's say, the S&P 500. So for example, a firm might have a direct indexing strategy designed to track the largest US companies. And to the consumer, they're thinking, oh, well, that's a direct index of the S&P 500. But then when you start to look at the fine print, you finally realize that this is some proprietary index that the firm made up, right? It isn't really the exact same thing as the S&P 500, right? Not all of them are this way, but you need to be extremely careful because this oftentimes happens. Now, with all this being said, I do believe that the stars can align for a direct indexing strategy to work within someone's portfolio. But the stars really need to align. So for example, if someone really is bringing in, let's say, $1 million plus a year in W-2 income, and they are constantly dollar cost averaging into an index, then maybe direct indexing makes sense. But even if this prime candidate were to be working with me as a client, I still am probably shying away from direct indexing. And it's for this final reason. So during my tenure at one of the largest brokerage firms in the country, I got to see clients that were some of the first investors in direct indexing strategies. Because keep in mind, direct indexing has really just started to hit the mainstream really over the last year or two. But the reality is that these strategies have been out for well over a decade now. So when I would work with these clients that had these strategies set up a decade plus ago, when you fast forward to today, the account that was supposed to be a direct index of, let's say, the S&P 500 is really just an account of hundreds of different stock positions with just a bunch of embedded gains, right? Because what's happened to the S&P 500 over the last decade, right? It's gone up pretty significantly, right? Most of the stocks in the index have gone up pretty significantly over time. And so the reality is that there aren't very many losses anymore to harvest from, right? You're hard pressed to find any. In fact, a lot of those positions might have lots of appreciation in them. And so what you ended up with were these accounts with hundreds of positions, tons of unrealized capital gains. And then the client was like, well, I don't want this thing anymore. I don't really need it. I'm paying a pretty expensive fee for it. I don't really want this direct indexing strategy anymore. But the problem was that the client felt trapped because they were like, shoot, how the heck am I going to trim myself out of all these different positions? They all have gains. I'm going to incur capital gain every time I sell. It's going to be an administrative pain in the butt. Just forget it, right? And they ended up just holding on to it. All the while, the firm that sold them that, is making, at least 0.5% on the transaction, right? So I want to make this very clear, right? Would I never use a direct indexing strategy for a client? I'm not saying that, right? I think really anything and everything is on the table at some point, but it has to make sense. And the problem is that, in my opinion, it's tough to find those scenarios when it does make sense. And even if you do find the right candidate, long term, it might end up being a pain in the butt. And if I found that client where this is a good fit now, maybe for a few years, you best believe I'm giving them that warning of, hey, 15 years down the road from now, are you still going to be a fan of this thing, right? Now, if you're wondering why the heck is direct indexing now just becoming a big thing and it's being advertised heavily? It all boils down to this. It's what the consumers want. It's just business. It's like when Popeyes a few years ago started selling those chicken sandwiches that everyone went crazy for. And before you know it, literally everybody has a spicy chicken sandwich that they're trying to sell, right? There's even like pizza places, right, that started selling spicy chicken sandwiches because for like a couple month period, the American consumer just really wanted a spicy chicken sandwich. And it's the same thing here. Let me explain. We've just come out of a decade of very low interest rates, right? That has obviously changed, but really for the most part, over the last 13, 14 years, we've been in a historically low interest rate environment. And because of that, an index like the S&P 500 has outperformed everything. And it has outperformed the majority of active large cap managers that have tried to compare themselves to the S&P 500. So as a result, the consumer has index fund fever. I mean, you don't have to look very far for this, right? Go on a place like Reddit and different places like this, and people are constantly talking about how, look at the last 10 years of the S&P 500 versus, large cap active managers, and the S&P 500 is winning. But here's the issue. Active funds versus index funds, no matter the category, whether it's US large cap, bonds, international, etc., there's usually waves or periods of times where one might do better than the other. So all these firms, these big asset managers, rather than wait for that time for active to become very hot again and have active funds and strategies sell like hotcakes, what they've decided to do is just say, hey, let's just sell the consumer what they want. They want an index strategy, let's give it to them. Hence, direct indexing blowing up. Oh, and let's also market it from a tax standpoint so that people really buy in. So at the end of the day, this is, in my opinion, it's a lot of marketing, and you have to really understand the strategy. Again, do not get me wrong. Direct indexing can make sense, but in my opinion, it's a very small portion of clientele where the stars would really need to align for it to happen. It's not a strategy that I believe belongs in the average consumer's portfolio. I hope you found this helpful, guys. If you guys need help optimizing your financial plans, taxes, portfolio, whatever it may be sure to check us out. That's www.modernwealth.com. That's modern spelled with no vowels, wealth.com. We would love to help you out. This has been real fun, guys, and I will see you next time.